All right, it is the Echoes of Fear with Jason Hewlett and Kenton J. Moore. I am Jason Hewlett.
And I'm Kenton J. Moore.
And this is a podcast exactly what the title explains. We are here to talk about what scares you.
And the fear and phobia, and we're going to talk about the difference and a little bit about cultural and...
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Quite often starting with the, I guess you could say, quote-unquote, more intellectual side of things, and then easing into sort of more of the pop culture anecdotal piece. I guess, Kenton, first explain to the listeners out there, hopefully like there's more than one. Mom, are you listening?
It's always the hope. It's always the hope.
A little bit about who you are and why this topic fascinates you.
Yeah, so I'm Kenton. I started a company called Soulforge Media a while ago. I publish books and stuff, and I've written a whole lot of horror and thrillers. Very much enjoy psychological thrillers, my favorite style, and so on and so forth. In university, I studied a little bit of sociology and archaeology, then heavily leaned into anthropology. And I tell you, if I'd have known mythologist was a thing back then, I probably would have had an entirely different career path. So,
right on. Yeah, and my background is in journalism and film, and I too am also a writer and a filmmaker and a podcaster. I've always been interested as sort of an best described as an anxious child. I've always been interested in why things scare me, which is probably why when it comes to like entertainment, I lean towards horror, thriller type stories. And my big pastime is I'm a ghost hunter. So I go looking for those things that technically scare us. So when Kenton brought up the idea of doing a podcast about this, it just made logical sense to get on board.
Yeah, exactly. And, and you talk about the why. The why is a really good place to be coming from, because what makes these fears the fear? And in every episode, we're going to talk about a certain fear or phobias, and we're going to specifically look at how that's affected society, how that's affected some of our culture here, and the movies and the stories that we like and the games that we play.
Exactly. And we're kicking things off with a bit of a two-parter, because this is a topic that we could probably talk about for the entire run of this show, but it's fear of the dark.
Yes, as the technical term for it is Nyctophobia, which comes from the Greek word nycto, meaning night. Not to be confused with scotophobia, which is also fear of the darkness itself. We'll get into that a little bit later. But nyctophobia, one of the most common fears, generally, especially amongst children. Most of them get out of it at a teen to early adult age, but some adults have it right up through their entire life.
It's very true. I mean, my son, he just turned 13, but even now that he's kind of put a lot of those childhood fears aside, he still likes the door open at night, and he still likes to have a little bit of illumination. So not so much a night light, but his computer kind of has lights on it that even when it's off, the lights are on, and it kind of gives his room a bit of just a glow. Something where if he wakes up and he looks, he can kind of tell what's in his general vicinity.
Yeah, and it's interesting because psychology today specifically refers to nyctophobia being fear of being left alone in the dark. So that's a very interesting point, that your son likes to have his door open and so on and so forth. One of my favorites is First Nations, indigenous peoples in North America. They don't believe in things like whistling at night, or they'll hang curtains and things to keep the darkness at bay. And I find all of that fascinating, that it's about being alone in the dark, not so much the darkness itself.
Well, and I think, because when you're in the dark, I don't know if you found this, Kenton, but it's what you're kind of comfortable within the zone of what you can see, right? And it's sort of what lays beyond that. And I mean, there was a time when our great ancestors, when we were living out on the prairies, you would sit sort of around the fire at night and it would light you. But there'd literally be times when, say, like a bobcat would just kind of come out, grab who was ever at the fringe of that, and pull them back. And so you all just huddled a little bit closer to the fire, because it is literally like what is out there. Not so much the darkness itself, but what is the darkness hiding?
Yeah. And, in a lot of therapy and psychology and stuff talks about how that a fear of the dark isn't necessarily of the darkness itself, which is into that tie-in on scotophobia we mentioned earlier, but it's the fear of what's in the dark. It's the things we can't see. And that is prevalent in all of our art and our media. And we use darkness to entice that imagination, entice that part of you, that creative fear that fills in the gaps when you can't see, touch, taste, or feel.
Well, we'll get definitely to that into part 2 here when we're going to look at the pop culture, how like movies, TV, books play on this fear of the dark. And what's interesting to me is when we can talk about like how a book makes you scared of the dark because it's you can't see anything. But it does work. Good writers can do that. But starting from the psychological point, Kenton, when did you sort of realize that you had this childhood fear? And do you have any experiences that stick with you from when you were a kid that sort of showed how that was?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I grew up on a farm, right? I grew up on a huge chunk of property up here in northern British Columbia. And the only light we really had was the stars at night and the occasional train that might go by on the highway or vehicles on the highway. And, you know, like for me, it was being outside and the sun went down. And then you got to try to get home. And we had all this hay field and we had forest and we had land like that. And, you know, more than once I was coming along and you hear snapping and cracking because there might be a deer or something that you just spooked out of the trees, you know. And a couple times, coming back, I actually ran into a bear.
A beer wouldn't be so bad to run into, actually, out in the middle of the woods.
But yeah, you know, and that's just it. It was the things that I encountered in the darkness that kind of led a little bit to it. Of course, when I got older, I became less afraid of it because I wasn't afraid of what the darkness itself. I was afraid of what was out there, and it sort of turned into a fascination. And I went through a phase with some friends of mine where we got into ghost hunting and we started doing some different things, especially up on like Chuchua, the local reservation up here, going up there and hanging out with them at night. And one time we went into like the Tranquil Sanatorium and got into the tunnels below, which was a terrifying experience in its own right. But you know, darkness itself, it never became a fear at all for me, but a fascination. And then years later, when I was in the Navy, I fell in love with it because in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I've never seen anything darker than that. When you're on a ship out there, the only thing that you have is you and the water and whatever light you brought with you.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine that having, like, I mean, I've been on lakes, but lakes, you can see the other side, like the campfires or the traffic lights and stuff. I couldn't imagine being out in the ocean with, like, if there's no moon, it's just dark.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, the funny part about the Navy stuff too is the darkest dark I've ever experienced in my life was in the Navy, and it was actually in a training simulator. You know, like we were inside, they had this whole section of a ship built and they put us inside there and we were being taught how to fight fire inside a ship. And let me tell you something, when the inside of a ship fills up with smoke, it doesn't matter whether you have light or not. You're not seeing anything. It was the most surreal experience I've ever had in the dark.
My grandfather was a firefighter, and he'd always talk about that was the worst part when going into burning buildings, when you've got like your respirator on and your mask. That's awesome. And it's filled up with smoke and you can't see anything. And I never quite understood that, but when I was a reporter, I was on the crime beat, so I did a lot with firefighters, and they do the firefighter training. And I actually got to go up and wear the gear and go into like the simulated fire burning building part. And that was I'm a bit claustrophobic, which is obviously a future episode. So mixing claustrophobia with like being scared of the dark was a horrible experience.
I have anecdotes about that one with the Navy too. But yeah, so that's what it was for me. What did your dad, did he ever have any kind of issues with it? Or
my grandfather? No, he was fine. Like he was one of those guys though, but I mean, for a grandfather, he'd be like the coolest grandfather because he volunteered for the army, like too young, but he got in. He lied about his age. He fought in the Second World War. Like he landed at Juno Beach on D-Day. He fought his way into Germany, did all that. And then in civilian life, he was a firefighter. I mean, the dude was not scared of anything that I could tell.
You know, and that's an interesting segue too. My grandfather also fought in World War II as a tank commander. And after he came home, he became a foreman at a sawmill in Revelstoke, and he had a German electrician working for him. Super cool story. He told us this. He actually wrote a book called My Life as I Recall It after, and he self-published to us. And he tells a story about this German electrician. And they got to talking, and they found out that they were on the opposite sides of a Parisian river at the same time. And while they were there, each side would just randomly shoot at sounds in the darkness across this river. They'd hear movement and they'd be like, oh, it's the Allies, or oh, it's the Nazis. And they would just spray and pray across this river. And they found out they were there across that same river at the same time. And then years later are working together in a sawmill in Revelstoke.
That's wild. That is wild, man. What are the odds?
Yeah, it's exactly there. You don't know. But again, that right back into that whole fear of the dark where there's a noise out there. What could it be? And your mind just starts playing tricks on you. It might not have even been a human being. It could have been a muskrat or a squirrel dropped a nut,
That just got machine gunned to death. That squirrel ain't dropping no more nuts around there. I'll tell you that much right now.
Exactly, I wrote a short story years ago for the CBC Literary Awards, and I called it The Touch of Shadow. And the story was very much about, it was about death in the woods and stuff, but it had that same theme, right? This guy hadn't hunted since his father passed away almost 15, 16 years ago. Decided to return to their old hunting grounds just to reconnect with his dad because he was getting older and his health was getting bad. And while he's there, he starts hearing all these noises and the darkness is coming in and he's losing his vision and his imagination starts taking over. And of course, as you can imagine, the story takes a bit of a supernatural twist, but I've always been a very big fan of that. It's supernatural until the very last moment. And then you're like, oh man, was it really supernatural or was it science, right? And again, it's that filling in the dark spaces with your imagination.
Well, that's like growing up, our house, we talked about this before we started recording, how our whole culture is based around warding off the dark, like at night. As soon as humans could figure out like gaslight and torches, we started doing that. I think it was partly for protection, to ward off what was out there, because animals aren't going to come into the light to hunt you. But we just keep doing that. Like now, look at like where we live. I mean, it's a bit different. You live out on rural property, but in town, we have street lights. Everybody turns their lights on. Nothing is going to crawl out of the dark and get us, that in that primal sense
that we know of,
that we know of. I guess now we do it to ward off people breaking into our homes or our cars or stuff like that. But we still do that. And when I was a kid, our house that I grew up in, that my dad built, he made sure that every room was super well lit. Like it all had these like fluorescent lights up along the rims of the walls that were sort of hidden behind things, but it was still illuminated the whole room. And growing up, like it was never dark. But when I would go to bed at night, then it was almost to the detriment, because suddenly I'm in a room that's pitch black. And I could remember lying in bed, waiting to fall asleep, and then clicking my light on really quick just to see if I could catch something sneaking up on me. And I wouldn't be able to go to bed unless I looked under the bed, opened and checked the closets, and all that kind of stuff. And that persisted, I think, way long. I think partly because now that I do look for ghosts, and I've come to the conclusion that whatever ghosts are around us all the time anyways. I might have been picking up on that subconsciously, but I still had to do that. But now, our house here is the opposite. Neither my wife nor I turn on any of the main lights. Most of our lighting in this is through like lamps and stuff like that. And down in the basement where we're filming here, I turn on like one little light in the corner of the library, and then there's the lights from the computer when it's in sleep mode. And that's it. But I'm more comfortable now being in the dark.
Yeah.
I think now that I'm not scared of the dark anymore. I actually really like it. I'm actually happier at night than I am during the daylight. I'm not quite sure why, but what are your thoughts on that? Like,
yeah, I'm right there with you, man. Like, honestly, so I live on a 20-acre property up in the mountains, just north of Kamloops here.
Jealous.
Yeah, you still got to come out for a barbecue. By the way.
I do.
Been poking him about that since we met each other, but so we've got all this land and it backs onto Crown land, so it's absolutely wild. And in a conversation with Jason a while ago, we were talking about how if I face one way, I'm looking at civilization. I've got highway, train tracks, I've got farmland and all that kind of stuff. But if I turn around and face the other way, it's just wilderness. It's empty mountain, empty forest, you know. So we have this huge halogen light on the top of our shop, right? My parents installed it. And, you know, out of all of the things that we have going on at our farm, that one light is responsible for like 35% of our hydroelectric bill, right? But as soon as the night goes, it's dark activated. So as soon as it's dark, that thing lights up everything. And, you know, I asked my parents once, I was like, what's that for? You know, and is it for security? Well, yeah, of course, because you live out that far away from anything. You got to worry about somebody just coming in off the highway and helping themselves to your stuff. But it's also, because we're beekeepers and we raise chickens, that bright light keeps the coyotes away. It keeps the bears at the edge of our property. They don't like coming in after our garbage because the light is directly on it. So we've, as humans, have evolved to use light to push not only the darkness away, but most of the creatures that call the darkness home, right? And there's some interesting documentaries that talk about this, that it researched this, especially, I think it was BBC Planet Earth had an episode on light pollution and how it's affecting nature and it's ruining the cycles of like baby turtles and all this kind of stuff. It's fascinating, you know, and you think like the brightest places on the planet, a lot of people will go, oh, New York Times Square. But I visited Shanghai when I was in the Navy. We came up on the Yangtze River and we docked alongside the river right in the middle of Shanghai. And they had these boats going up and down the river that had LED billboards. Like I've never in my entire life seen anything brighter. In the darkest point of the night, it was like an early dawn all the time.
That's crazy, man. I know there's places in Florida where in order to protect those turtles, all your outside lights have to be red.
Yeah.
A dull red, right? And I like that we're becoming more aware of how our weird neuroticism about the dark and needing things to be light, we're becoming aware of that and how it's affecting the planet around us.
Yeah.
Because, and we're not here, like, neither Kenton nor I are psychologists. We're trained in science or hold master's degrees in anything.
Yeah. We're just obsessive nerds.
Obsessive nerds. And we're not here to offer solutions to the phobias that you have or the fears. But I think it's important as a species that we need to get past this real irrational fear. And that all fears are irrational.
Yeah.
And they're all generally based around dying. It's the same. All anxiety is death anxiety. We're afraid that what we're scared of is going to kill us.
Or hurt us. Yeah. Or change or ruin our life in some way. Yeah.
When really your life is going to get changed or ruined regardless of anything going on around you. So you better get comfortable with that. So like in part 2, we're going to be diving more into, like I said, the pop culture pieces of it. But it'd be cool to swap a few more stories.
Yeah.
Because we're both storytellers in our own way, Ken.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
What's another dark-related story that sort of comes out at you, whether you were a kid or an adult?
Well, the first of mine, you know, I guess I was camping with some friends once. There's a waterfall in that wild land I was talking about above my house. Maybe 15-minute drive from my house, there's a little creek that goes over 100-foot waterfall. And my friends and I used to camp above it when we were kids. And, you know, like we'd go up there, we'd have all of our beer, we'd take our trucks, you know, and our girlfriends, and we'd sit up there and we'd camp in the dark. And we never took lights. We didn't have lights back in those days. So our light was basically the bonfire that we'd have. And this one particular time we were up there, there's about 6 or 7 of us up there and we were camping. And this was before cell phones was a thing. It was before even digital cameras. Like this is back in the day where you'd go to 7-Eleven and you'd get one of those disposable 14-shot 35mm cameras from Kodak or whatever. And so we're taking pictures and we're up there and we're drinking and we're having a good time. And we pass out and everything's fine. And nobody thought anything of it. But while we were up there camping, we're all, you know, going off on our own into the dark in the trees to take a leak or whatever it was we were doing. And, you know, we never thought anything of it. It never crossed our mind until a couple weeks after that. One of my friends comes busting into my apartment, right? And he throws down this developed photograph like from his camera that he'd taken all these pictures. He goes, "Look at this shit, man. This is crazy." And he throws this photo down. So the picture was all of us behind the fire. And we're like, doing the usual thing, right? And on a tree behind us, sitting on a branch, was a freaking mountain lion. Like this huge mountain lion. It was just chilling there in the tree, tail hanging down, watching us while we're all around the fire. None of us had a clue it was there. Not one of us had a clue it was there, And that's probably one of my craziest in the dark stories. What about you, Jason?
That's a good one,
You
man.
gotta have some good ones.
You were like a smorgasbord just lined up for dinner. That's awesome.
It goes right into that. What's out there? You never know, right?
You never know. I've got kind of, I guess, two of them. One of the stories, it's two events that, and I've told this before on other podcasts, etc., in a documentary. We had a place at the Shuswap Lake. My parents built it, and we were out there for years. We sold it back in 2019 after my mom passed away. But back in 1996, I had to go and we had to replace the deck. It had been the original deck that had been there since like the 60s, and you were going to go through it. So I was out there replacing the deck. And I spent several days doing it. And there was I finished on the one day, and the people who were helping went home. And so I was going to spend the night, because I'd spend weeks out there by myself. And this is before the place was before the Quail Lodge was built. It wasn't really well built up. And so I'm out there, and I kind of had the dinner, and I was like, was just chilling out, going to read a book and have a beer or two and listen to some music and stuff like that. And the sun's setting.
Good picture.
Oh yeah. Good picture. Ready to go here for the night. And then I was suddenly terrified. All the hair on the back of my neck went up. I started getting chills.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. And I'm like, if I stay out here, I'm dead. Like it was like that. It's like it was like going from 0 to 100 like that, from complete calm, completely content to totally terrified. And I'm a pretty rational person, but I'm like, I can't stay. I can't stay. It was I was that terrified. So I packed everything up and I loaded it into my car. And back then the pump, it was outside under the deck. So you couldn't just leave the pump on. I had to go around the cabin, crawl under the deck, and by now it's pretty much full dark. Turn the pump off, and then get back to the car, which I did, and I bombed out of there. And it took almost a full hour drive for me to calm down. And I remember I was staying at my mom's at the time, and I came home, and she's like, "What are you doing home?" And it's like, it was just time to come back. I can't explain what that was. 21 years later, it's 2017. Same location, but we rebuilt the cabin. We had to upgrade all our properties. Rebuilt it. Same thing. I did an annual vacay solo trip out there by myself. Like Jess and Griffin would stay home, and I'd go out there. And I was going to stay out for one more night. Completely calm. Everything's fine. And then the hairs start going on the back of my neck. And I become completely terrified again that if I don't leave right now, I'm going to die. So packed everything up, loaded it into the truck. Didn't have to go under the deck this time because the pump was inside. We could leave it running 365 days a year. Took almost the full hour getting home to calm down. And Jess is like, "What are you doing home early?" And I'm like, "It was just time to come back." And I cannot explain. The only thing, and this is where I don't want to sound, I think I say I'm a rational person. I don't know what it was. I think sometimes we just are born with this innate sixth sense that when we are in legitimate danger, and you were in the military, so you're trained in combat and things like that, when something's wrong and you should just go. You're not welcome here anymore. But there is something called, it's like infrasound, and it's a fear frequency that is, we can't hear it, but certain animals will use it to sort of sometimes immobilize their prey, or even just to ward off unwanted people. And the only thing I can think of is that's what it was.
Yeah.
So something out in the Shuswap,
just giving you that.
Occasionally shows up, and maybe it wants to walk down to the water and drink from the lake or something.
Warning you.
Is warning me to go away. Yeah. So that's one of my stories.
It's so cool to hear you mention infrasound too, because again, future thing to discuss, but one of my favorite mysteries in the world is the Dyatlov Pass incident out of Russia. And that was one of the theories, is the wind moving through these high mountain rocks was creating this infrasound. There's a lot of research into infrasound too, that it could be part of how dogs communicate. Like when a dog growls, the difference in its growl, how sometimes, there's a growl when it's playing, and then there's a growl when it's like GTF out of my face. Yeah. And there's some theory into that being an infrasound thing. So it's really cool. I'm fascinated with it. So.
Well, I am too. And in some of the fields of research that I do, that comes up in certain cryptids, but we won't get into that because that's not what this show's about.
Well, perfect segue though, because that's one thing I wanted to say. Like Jason, with you being a paranormal investigator, when you look at Nyctophobia online or on Psychology Today or any kind of website or medical type research, they all talk about how it being more of a fear of what's out there as opposed to a fear of the dark itself. But one of the things that they mention is it's prevalent in almost all children. Like 95 and 97% of children go through a phase, right? And one of those things is always a fear of a robber or a monster under their bed or a ghost, or something. So is that something you find in your research, that things happen more in the dark at night? Or
no, actually, that's the thing. In terms of paranormal activity, it can happen any time of the day. Day, night, doesn't have to just be at night. We seem to be obsessed. Like, we're talking about this in part 2 here, but like every horror movie, it's always at night, and the ghosts are coming out at night and the monster's always at night. But no, man, like if you're scared of ghosts, you should be scared of them 24/7. Like the dark won't help.
Well, thanks for that.
And no, 3 a.m. is not a peak time for this activity either. That's just a BS Hollywood invention or stuff. But to wrap up, I want to just share one quick story. I mentioned I had 2 of them. This one was actually happened just a few years ago. My colleague Pete Wren and I were going to Vancouver to hunt ghosts, and we had to stop in Maple Ridge to drop off something. Like he had sold some goods, some books to someone through Marketplace, and had to drop them off on the way down. So, and Maple Ridge is, for Vancouver, a pretty rural place to be, right? Some of it. And so we're following Google Maps to this place, and we're in the middle of like nowhere as far as we're concerned. We thought we were lost. We weren't. But, we had to stop and finally take a leak because there's nothing around. There's no gas station. So we pull off on the side of the road. It's like 10 at night. It's super dark. The only lights from the vehicle. So we get up, Pete goes off on one side to take a leak, and I go off on the other. But I start walking into the trees just in case. I don't want some other vehicle to see me.
Shining their light on.
Right? So I'm in the dark, and Pete's like, he's British. He's like, mate, what are you doing? This is how horror movies start. Like, get back here.
That's awesome. So, what's hiding out in the dark? Well, it could be Jason peeing.
Right? Just so you're aware of that next time you stop on a roadside. And I thought that'd be a good place to end, because next episode, we're continuing our discussion on fear of the dark, but we're getting into how it plays out in popular culture, as we've talked about before.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, some art philosophy and the use of black and color and darkness in creating how do I put this? In sort of like how you can manipulate the imagination of your viewer using things like contrast and darkness in art as well as in movies and TV.
Exactly. So we hope you enjoyed part 1 here. If you did, subscribe to our podcast, leave a comment, and we will be back. We're doing this weekly, right? When it drops.
Yeah, man, that's what I'm hoping. Yeah, we're hoping for weekly when it drops. If we can get enough people interested in it, and hell, we'll probably do it anyway because it's just fun.
It's just fun, exactly. So we're back next week with more Echoes of Fear.
Thanks.